Hi, good afternoon to all of you. So, let us start once again. See, first of all, I'll let you know now we are going to start with another topic altogether, and that is international relations and India's foreign policy. See, some questions has been asked, right? Asked like Great Economic Depression, then socialism. We'll come to all these things, clear? Because the question says during the Great Depression, the 1930s, the capitalists had to go through a severe crisis, but the socialists were at rapid pace of economic growth. As India decided to tilt more towards socialism after the independence, does that affect the relationship in US and India? We'll come to Indo-US relationship. We'll discuss the historical background also. As we have seen, the US was against India and every war we fought against Pakistan. Obviously, what we'll discuss about the approach of US, which was more tilted towards Pakistan in the era of Cold War. What were the reasons? We'll come to. So all these issues related to secularism in Turkey and all these things will come in course of international relations. Don't worry, we'll be coming to all these things, clear? Because all these are parts of international relations that we are going to start. We'll come to all those issues, facets, and dimensions in coming time. Why US did not support India in the era of Cold War? Why US supported Pakistan in the era of Cold War? All these factors would be discussed. Reasons would be discussed in course of time. It's clear. Related to Turkey also, anti-secular attack on Turkey. We'll come to that. Clear? Attack in Turkey. Now, first of all, clear? So, good afternoon to all of you. Let us start with a new topic, and this new topic is India's foreign policy. Clear? So, we'll start with India's foreign policy. India's foreign policy. Clear? So, we'll discuss about India's foreign policy and just understand before we start. Clear? Normally, what would be the approach of our session, how things are to be covered, we'll be discussing that. Clear? So, as far as India's foreign policy is concerned, which is divided into three major sections. Clear? First of all, India's relationship with major powers like United States, major powers like United Kingdom, France, Germany, and countries like Japan, Israel. So, will the India's interaction with major powers of the world. Second major dimension of this topic is India's relationship with regional and global organizations. Regional organizations like ASEAN, SAARC, BIMSTEC, and global organizations like BRICS, World Bank, IMF, United Nations. We'll be discussing. And third major dimension is India's relationship with neighboring countries, starting with Afghanistan, Pakistan, China, in fact, clear, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Maldives, all SAARC countries, clear. So these are three major dimensions of international relations we need to be discussed. Along with this, we have another topic of Indian diaspora also, which is also a part of international relations, clear. So we'll be discussing about India's relationship with major powers of the world, clear. I'll be taking India's interaction with major countries along with organization. India's neighboring countries will be done by Ashish sir, and Indian diaspora will be done by Mr. Bivas Mishra. Clear? So, first of all, let us start with India's relationship with major countries of the world. Before we go on to start directly with India's interaction with major powers like United States, Russia, Japan, Israel, first of all, we need to discuss about major components of India's foreign policy, which was drafted at the time of India's independence, in which the leading role was played by the first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. So first of all, we'll understand about draft of India's foreign policy and major components of India's foreign policy, and then we'll discuss about India's interaction with major countries of the world. Just understand, first of all, I'll let you know. Clear? As far as India's foreign policy is concerned, the architect of India's foreign policy was the first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. In fact, Nehru advocated India's foreign policy for the first time when interim government was formed on 2nd of September 1946. And since interim government till the death of Nehru, Nehru held the portfolio of External Affairs Minister apart from being the Prime Minister of India. So foreign policy was largely carved and decided by Nehru, and therefore he is regarded as the architect of India's foreign policy. Clear? Now, what are the major components from the beginning till present time? Clear? India's foreign policy is based on certain clear-cut objectives and certain important ideals or principles as well. The objectives on which India's foreign policy has been based is based on realistic considerations, and the ideals or principles on which India's foreign policy is based on certain realism, certain idealism, and therefore it is largely accepted by scholars that India's foreign policy is a blend of realism and idealism. Clear? So realism largely reflected by objectives of India's foreign policy which are yet to be fulfilled, and ideals are represented by the principles of India's foreign policy. Now, what are the major objectives of India's foreign policy? What are the major principles on which India's foreign policy has been formulated? We'll discuss those objectives and principles indicating the realism and idealism of India's foreign policy. Clear? First of all, write a brief background. Clear? Write heading as international relations, and then you write India's foreign policy. International relations and then India's foreign policy. Foreign policy. Clear? Right. India emerged to be a sovereign nation state, and it is very important for foreign policy. India emerged to be a sovereign nation state, sovereign nation state in the middle of the 20th century, in the middle of the 20th century. Clear? 20th century. Right. Indian leaders drafted an independent foreign policy, in which the leading role was played by Jawaharlal Nehru. Who is considered as architect of India's foreign policy. Considered as architect of India's foreign policy. Architect of India's foreign policy. Architect of India's foreign policy. India's foreign policy. Clear? Right. Nehru announced India's foreign policy. Nehru announced India's foreign policy on 2nd of September 1946. 2nd of September 1946, when interim government, temporary government, when interim government was formed. When interim government was formed. In fact, this government was headed by Nehru. Interim government was formed. Okay, change paragraph. Right, India's foreign policy. India's foreign policy has been drafted with clear-cut objectives. Clear-cut objectives which reflect the aspirations of the people, which reflect the aspirations of the people, which reflect the aspirations of the people. Clear? Right. The first major aim of India's foreign policy, objective, aim, the first major aim of India's foreign policy is to protect, is to protect, is to protect territorial integrity, is to protect territorial integrity and sovereignty, territorial integrity and sovereignty. Clear? This is the first major aim. Clear? Unfulfilled aspiration even now. Clear? Territorial integrity and sovereignty. Now, how it has to be done through foreign policy? Just understand. Don't write. First of all, keep on understanding. So, right now we have started to discuss about objectives or aims of India's foreign policy. Clear? So, first major objective is to ensure and to protect territorial integrity and sovereignty. First of all, clear? What do we mean by integrity and sovereignty? When India became an independent nation, the independence was accompanied with surgical partition of India into two independent countries of India and Pakistan. So at the very outset of India's independence, India's territorial integrity got affected with creation of Pakistan. Clear? It was a big setback to the sentiments of people in India, and therefore it was realized that in coming time India will ensure better relationship with neighboring countries and with major powers of the world to ensure India's territorial integrity and complete sovereignty or independence. Clear? This still remains to be unfulfilled aspiration, because even though Pakistan was created, in course of time Pakistani forces entered into Kashmir and large parts of Kashmir was brought under Pakistan's control, known as Pakistan occupied Kashmir. Obviously, large parts of Kashmir remains under the control of Pakistan. It still remains to be an unfulfilled aspiration to ensure territorial integrity of India. And India had been convincing the global community that this is illegal, whereby large parts of Kashmir remains under Pakistan's control, and therefore we are still trying that our territorial integrity is restored in coming time. This can be done through active foreign policy to be pursued. Clear? Moreover, India's territorial integrity remains to be an unfulfilled aspiration or objective, because large parts of Indian territory are also occupied by China. China has occupied the region of Aksai Chin and large parts of Arunachal Pradesh since Sino-Indian War of 1962, as China does not respect the McMahon line that divides India and China. Clear? Obviously, therefore, India has been convincing China and other global leaders whereby India's territorial integrity is restored properly. Clear? So, all these factors indicate that one major aspiration of India's foreign policy is to convince the neighboring countries and global bodies that India's territorial integrity needs to be respected and maintained in order to promote India as a pure sovereign nation state. So this remains to be an unfulfilled aspiration, that is India's territorial integrity and sovereignty, and still remains to be an objective of our foreign policy. We'll write some line. We'll write about this objective. Clear? Right. Right. Since India's independence, since India's independence, territorial integrity has been affected. Territorial integrity has been affected. Territorial integrity has been affected by has been affected by Pakistan and China. By Pakistan and China. Pakistan and China. Clear? Right. Right. Just after India's independence, just after India's independence, Pakistan forcefully occupied the western part of Kashmir, forcefully occupied the western part of Kashmir, known as the Pakistan occupied Kashmir, POK, known as the Pakistan occupied Kashmir, POK, Pakistan occupied Kashmir, Pakistan occupied Kashmir, clear? Right, right. This affected the sentiments of Indian people. 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 Sentiments of Indian people. This affected the sentiment of Indian people. This affected the sentiment of Indian people. Do understand? Look into this. Indian people. This affected the sentiment of Indian people. Clear? This is line of control, and this is part of Kashmir is under Pakistan. Aksai Chin is under the control of China. And in this middle region, this is also under control of China. Clear? So only this region remain under the control of India. People. Clear? Right. Indian leaders Indian leaders tried to convince Indian leaders tried to convince Indian leaders tried to convince global community and even the members of United Nations that India's territorial integrity should be restored. Should be restored. Clear? Right. However, it still remains to be. However, it still remains to be unfulfilled aspiration of India, unfulfilled aspiration of India, fulfilled aspiration of India. Clear? Change paragraph. Next, clear? Right. Similarly, China has occupied the region of Aksai Chin. China has occupied the region of Aksai Chin in Kashmir. Aksai Chin in Kashmir, Kashmir, which has affected India's territorial integrity. Clear? Right. Therefore, India's foreign policy aims to aims to maintain aims to maintain territorial integrity and territorial integrity and sovereignty through continuous engagement with neighboring countries and the global bodies like United Nations. So this remains to be first major objective based on practical considerations. Clear? Change paragraph. Right. Objective, the second major objective of of India's foreign policy is to ensure economic growth and development. Is to ensure economic growth and development. Economic growth and development. Clear? Now just understand here. Clear? Just understand why it is important in foreign policy. Clear? No country in the world is self-sufficient in nature. So obviously every country has certain amount of commodities in surplus and has some commodities in deficit, and this can be balanced only by promoting healthy trade relationship with other countries. Clear? So bilateral and multilateral trade are important vehicles of economic growth and development, because with bilateral and multilateral trade, countries can export the surplus item and in return can import the deficit item, which can make the country self-sufficient in nature. Clear? That is why trade component assumes a very important form and component of foreign policy. India has also been very active in promoting bilateral and multilateral trade through healthy bilateral and multilateral relationship as a vehicle of economic growth and development. Clear? In foreign policy, it must be understood that for bilateral and multilateral trade has become very important, and therefore several countries have started to conclude an agreement which is known as the free trade agreements. Clear? So free trade agreements are being concluded by major countries of the world, whereby certain items could be traded without any restrictions or custom duties, so that free flow of goods and services could be ensured for proper economic growth and development. So economic growth and development becomes one of the major objective of foreign policy being executed by India. So in course of time, India has started to maintain healthy bilateral relationship with many countries to promote trade component, so that India could export a surplus item and at the same time can import deficit items to ensure self-sufficient economy. Clear? And this just because of this also, India has been playing a major role even in global trade organization known as the World Trade Organization or WTO, with its headquarters at Geneva. And therefore, even at this point of time, since trade is not followed equitably all across the world, most of the negotiation WTO fail, and therefore it still remains to be an unfulfilled aspiration whereby trade could be promoted through India's foreign policy to ensure rapid economic growth and development. So still it has to be carried forward effectively to convert India into a developed nation by promoting bilateral and multilateral trade relationship. Clear? So we'll write about economic growth and development. Clear? Right. Right. There is no country in the world, there is no country in the world which is self-sufficient in nature, which is self-sufficient in nature that 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 indicate the importance of that indicate the importance of that indicate the importance of indicate the importance of that indicate the importance of that indicate the importance of bilateral and multilateral trade, to export surplus commodities, and to import is and to import scarce commodities and to import scarce commodities clear. Like India has been proactive on trade front, and has even concluded free trade agreements, with many countries to promote economic growth and development. To promote economic growth and development. Clear? Right. India is an active player. Moreover, India is an active player in India is an active player in the World Trade Organization, active player in the World Trade Organization, WTO, trade organization, which ensures rule-based trading, at global level, Clear? Right? All such objectives, all such objectives can be achieved, can be achieved through, through active foreign policy, through active foreign policy, active foreign policy. Clear? This is second major objective. Clear? Now, third major objective of India's foreign policy. Clear? The third major objective is to maintain global peace and security. Global peace and security. Global peace and security. Global peace and security. Peace and security. Now just understand this, clear? Right, from the beginning when India became an independent nation, India has been committed to global peace and security, and this is reflected by the fact that India was one of the original signatory of United Nations Charter that led to the establishment of United Nations organization. Moreover, India was one of the first country to provide large peacekeeping force to United Nations in order to maintain peace and security at global level. All these initiatives has been taken by India, and India still remains to be committed to United Nations global institution to maintain peace and security, and therefore this unfulfilled aspiration still remains to be a core objective of India's foreign policy in coming time. This clearly indicates India as a responsible country in global politics. Clear? Object global peace and security. Clear? Right. Since independence, India has been committed to India has been committed to global peace and security, global peace and security, security, as it was an original signatory. It was an original signatory of the United Nations, original signatory of the United Nations, clear? Right, beside, India was one of the first country, India was one of the first country to provide peacekeeping force, to provide peacekeeping force to the Security Council, right? Security Council capital. Peacekeeping force to the Security Council. Peacekeeping force to the Security Council. Security Council. Security Council to prevent any regional crisis, to prevent any regional crisis, prevent any regional crisis, regional crisis. Clear? Right. Is still India is a major contributor of is still India is a major contributor of the peacekeeping force to the United Nations, as global peace and security, as global peace and security is unfulfilled aspiration, they are yet to be achieved, unfulfilled aspiration, unfulfilled aspiration, aspiration, unfulfilled aspiration. This is third major objective of India's foreign policy. Clear? Now the fourth major objective of India's foreign policy. Clear? Called policy. The the fourth major objective was democratization, democratization of the world order, democratization of the world order. Now, what do you mean by this concept? Democratization of the world order. Clear? First of all, clear? When India became an independent country, India adopted the democratic form of government, and in course of time, India has emerged to be the largest functional democracy all across the world. In fact, India is being claimed as mother of democracy. Clear? So, largest functional democracy, mother of democracy in global politics. Clear? Since India adopted democratic form of government, emerged to be the largest functional democracy all across the world, India wanted democratic system to be promoted in other parts of the world. Clear? And therefore, India always believed that democratic system should be promoted in different countries through internal changes and through peaceful transformation. Clear? But India never believes in forceful injection of democracy in other parts of the world. Clear? This is quite in contrast to the approach of United States. United States is the oldest functional democracy, and United States believes in forceful injection of democracy even through regime change and forceful change. Clear? This is difference in the approach of India and United States. India believes in promotion of democratic system through internal transition and peaceful reforms, but United States believes in forceful injection of democracy through regime change and military operation. This is in contrast to approach of India and United States, but both are committed to ensure democratization of the world order. Clear? Moreover, related to this only in contemporary times, India has also advocated democratization through changes in global institutions like United Nations. India is one of the vocal country to demand that United Nations needs to be reformed and restructured in order to reflect the contemporary realities of the time by including some new countries, including India, as permanent members of Security Council. All these still remains to be unfulfilled aspiration and still considered to be objectives of India's foreign policy. Clear? Right, next, democratization of the world order. Right, since independence, India adopted the democratic form of government, adopted the democratic form of government and emerged to be the largest functional democracy, emerged to be the largest functional democracy, largest functional democracy, largest functional democracy. Clear? Democracy, right? India, India in its foreign policy, India in its foreign policy India in its foreign policy has emphasized that democracy should be promoted at global level, through internal transition, and peaceful reforms. Internal transition and peaceful reforms. Peaceful reforms. Clear? Right. This approach is in contrast. This approach is in contrast to the approach of United States. Is in contrast to the approach of United States, which believe in forceful injection of democracy, forceful injection of democracy through military operations and regime change. Iraq. There are many examples. Through military operations and regime change. And regime change. And regime change. Regime change. And regime change. Clear? Change paragraph, right? India, India, India demand, that global institutions like the United Nations, global institutions like the United Nations should be restructured and reformed, should be restructured and reformed, should be restructured and reformed to include to include to include new countries as permanent members, to reflect the contemporary reality reality, and to achieve democratic world order, and to achieve democratic world order. So on unfulfilled aspirations, very realistic, clear, democratic world order, change paragraph. Right, objectives, all these objectives of India's foreign policy are based on practical considerations, and it reflects realism in our foreign policy. Realism in our foreign policy. Clear? Change paragraph. Right, clear? Right. At the same time, India's foreign policy, at the same time, India's foreign policy is based on certain principles, is based on certain principles, which impart, which impart idealism to India's foreign policy, which impart idealism to India's foreign policy, idealism to India's foreign policy. Okay? Right. Therefore, it is accepted. That India's foreign policy, is a blend of India's foreign policy is a blend of realism, and idealism, is a blend of realism and idealism. So realism being reflected by objectives of India's foreign policy, idealism being reflected by principles of India's foreign policy. So realism and idealism. Clear? Now we'll discuss about idealism or principles of India's foreign policy. Clear? Just understand. Principles are something which has been followed from the beginning. Realism or objective means something which are unfulfilled aspiration even in contemporary times. Clear? So now let us discuss about principles or ideals of India's foreign policy. Clear? The first major principle of India's foreign policy is the principle derived from Buddhist doctrine, and this principle is known as the principle of Panchashil. Clear? Which envisages 5 principles of coexistence. Clear? So this first major principle was derived by Jawaharlal Nehru from the Buddhist doctrine of Panchashil. Panch means 5. Clear? The 5 principles of respect and coexistence. Clear? What are the 5 components under Panchashil? The 5 components under Panchashil are, clear? These 5 components are important. The 5 components are: number 1, clear? The first component in the Panchashil is that if India and other countries establishes bilateral relationship, it must be based on mutual respect for each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty. Clear? So mutual respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty must be there in bilateral relationship. Second important component is that there should be non-aggression of all forms between the two countries. So if two countries come together, they should not adopt any form of aggression against each other. So mutual non-aggression is the second principle. Second is mutual non-interference in internal affairs of each other. Clear? So there should be no interference in the internal affairs of each country. Is clear? Fourth major is if two countries come into bilateral relationship, it should be based on mutual respect and equality. Clear? So there should be equality and mutual benefit for both the countries coming for bilateral agreement. Clear? This is the fourth one. And fifth one is to ensure peaceful coexistence. Clear? So based on these five principles, India advocated the principle of Panchsheel to be followed as a principle while maintaining and establishing healthy relationship with other countries of the world. Very important Panchsheel principle. And just because Nehru was very confident about Panchsheel in 1954, he signed Panchsheel agreement itself with Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai, where both Jawaharlal Nehru and Zhou Enlai accepted the five principles of peaceful coexistence together, even though it could not be survived for long as China declared unilateral war against India in 1962, leading to Sino-Indian War. We'll come to Sino-Indian War. Clear? So these are five principles of coexistence and the principle of Panchsheel. Clear? We'll write about this fast. Right, next. The first major principle, the first major principle of India's foreign policy is Panchsheel, derived from the Buddhist doctrine, derived from the Buddhist doctrine, derived from the Buddhist doctrine. Clear? Right. The principle of Panchsheel envisages the principle of Panchsheel envisages five important components. Five important components. Right, point wise. Number one, five important components, subpoints. Number one, mutual respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty. Mutual respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty. One. Second is mutual non-aggression, non-aggression of all forms, mutual non-aggression of all forms. Third, mutual non-interference, in internal affairs, non-interference in internal affairs. Fourth, clear? Fourth, mutual benefit and equality. And fifth, peaceful coexistence. Peaceful coexistence. So first principle is principle of Panchsheel. Clear? Panchsheel. Right here only. In fact, Jawaharlal Nehru concluded. Panchsheel agreement with Chinese Premier. Zhou Enlai in 1954. Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai, Zhouenlai, Zhou Enlai in 1954. in 1954. 1954. We'll come to this. What happened exactly? Clear? 1954. Change paragraph. Clear? Like the second major principle of India's foreign policy, the second major principle of India's foreign policy is non-alignment. India's foreign policy is non-alignment. Now just understand. We had discussed briefly earlier also. Clear? When India became an independent nation in 1947, the world witnessed the beginning of the Cold War politics. Clear? Cold War politics was basically based on ideological differences that led to the division of the world into two ideological blocks known as the communist bloc and the capitalist bloc. Communist bloc began to be aided by Soviet Union. Capitalist bloc began to be aided by United States, and guided by the sense of collective security, all the countries of two blocs began to acquire arms and weapons, which again created a scenario of a global war without actual fighting. This phenomena whereby situation of war prevails without actual fighting is known as the Cold War politics. Clear? In the era of Cold War, when India became an independent nation, Nehru advocated the principle of non-alignment, that is to maintain principled distance from the two power blocks. Clear? So do remember this term. It's principled distance from the two power blocks. Clear? Why we are emphasizing on this term? Principled distance from the two power blocks. The reason is Nehru made it clear that India will maintain distance from the two power blocks so that India does not jump into the line of acquiring arms and weapons which were being done by the members of the two power blocks or ideological blocks. But it must be understood, non-alignment never envisaged the principle of neutrality. Clear? So non-alignment is not neutrality. India made it clear that India will maintain principal distance, moral distance from the two countries. Clear? So even though India will maintain healthy bilateral relationship with one country, it will maintain distance with respect to principle of Cold War politics. Clear? So it was not neutrality, rather it was the principle of principal distance from the two power blocks as per the concept of non-alignment. Clear? When Nehru began to support the idea of non-alignment, this was promoted by several emerging independent countries of Asia and Africa, and all of them came together in Bandung Conference in Indonesia in 1955. And the deliberations of this conference resulted into non-aligned movement in 1961 at Belgrade in Yugoslavia. Clear? And it remains to be a principle, hardcore principle of India's foreign policy. But just understand, clear? Cold War came to an end in 1991 with the decline of Soviet Union. And when Cold War came to an end, several scholars began to point a question that now what is the relevance of non-aligned movement or non-aligned principle, because it was valid in the context of Cold War. But in course of time, non-alignment began to indicate that it will basically a movement, or rather non-aligned principle will indicate that resources of India and resources of other nation should be utilized not to support any bloc politics, but should be utilized to promote humanitarian concern, was supposed to promote socio-economic development rather than to support race for armament. Clear? These were the reasons to justify the continuity of non-aligned principle, and non-alignment still remains to be one of the major principles of India's foreign policy. Clear? Right about this principle. Clear? Right. When India became an independent nation, when India became an independent nation, nation, the phenomena of Cold War also started at global level. The phenomena of Cold War also started at global level. At global level. Started at global level. Clear? Right. The member states, the member states, the member states of the capitalist bloc, the member states of the capitalist bloc and the communist bloc began to acquire arms and weapons, began to acquire arms and weapons for collective security, arms and weapons for collective security, arms and weapons for collective security, collective security, security. Right. Under such circumstances, India decided to adopt. India decided to adopt the principle of non-alignment, so as to maintain, so as to maintain, maintain principled distance, so as to maintain principled distance from from principal distance from bloc politics, from bloc politics, principal distance from the bloc politics, from the bloc politics, distance from the bloc politics, from the bloc politics, politics, BLOC, bloc politics, clear? Right. This idea was supported by, this idea was supported by other emerging countries. This idea was supported by other emerging countries of Asia and Africa, other emerging countries of Asia and Africa that even resulted into non-aligned movement, movement in 1961, non-aligned movement in 1961, a movement in 1961. Change paragraph, right? Even though Cold War came to an end, even though Cold War came to an end in 1991, came to an end in 1991, came to an end in 1991. 1991, the principle of non-alignment, the principle of non-alignment has remained to be, the principle of non-alignment has remained to be a core principle, a core principle of India's foreign policy, core principle of India's foreign policy, foreign policy that is still ensures, principled distance from, principled distance from the power blocks, principal distance from the power blocks. Distance from the power blocks. Clear? Power blocks. Second, clear? Now the third principle of India's foreign policy, the third principle of India's foreign policy is complete faith in United Nations, complete faith in United Nations to resolve regional and global disputes, to resolve regional and global disputes. Faith in United Nations and its principle, clear? Right. India being a India being a founder member of United Nation, it has always supported the principles of United Nation. It has always supported the principle of United Nations, to maintain peace and security. Peace and security. Clear? Right. In United Nations, such trust in United Nations is reflected through large number of United Nations peacekeeping force, large number of United Nations peacekeeping force, United Nations peacekeeping force provided by India till contemporary times, provided by India till contemporary times. Clear? Right. The fourth major principle of India's foreign policy, the fourth major principle of India's foreign policy is opposition to racial discrimination, is opposition to racial discrimination and apartheid. Racial discrimination and apartheid. Clear? Right. From the beginning, India has always advocated racial equality, racial equality, and after independence, it became a core principle. It became a core principle whereby India emphasized, that it will not tolerate any form of racial discrimination, any form of racial discrimination, any form of racial discrimination, at global level. at global level. Clear? Right, next, the fifth, the major, last one. Clear? The fifth major, the clear, right? The fifth major principle of India's foreign policy, the fifth major principle of India's foreign policy is nuclear disarmament. Is nuclear disarmament. Now, this principle needs to be elaborated. Clear? Like the reason being that India believes in the principle of nuclear disarmament from the beginning, but at the same time, in contemporary times, India has emerged to be a declared nuclear weapon state. So, how can we reconcile the status of nuclear weapon state with the principle of nuclear disarmament? Because principles are something which cannot be compromised. Clear? So how come we have reconciled nuclear disarmament with the status of nuclear weapon state? That needs to be elaborated and explained. So we'll come to this principle elaborately, because from here different equations of international politics comes into being. So we'll come to all these major developments. Clear? So fifth major principle of nuclear disarmament needs to be explained elaborately, all major developments as well. So we'll come to nuclear disarmament elaborately. Clear? So coming to this principle of nuclear disarmament, we'll have a special treatment for this principle of nuclear disarmament. Different components are associated with this principle that needs to be understood clearly. So nuclear disarmament. Clear? The fifth and the major principle of India's foreign policy. Before we start this, we'll take some few questions. Clear? Next question is, first question is from Bishwajit. Sir, at the time of budget, we see India financial help for Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. What is the importance of this help? Is it given in terms of loan or help? Clear? See, first of all, I'll let you know, very importantly, clear? There's a question, there's a topic here. See, at the time of when India formulates and implements its budget or provides budgetary allocation, clear? India provides financial help to countries like Afghanistan. Several projects are funded by India in Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. Not only this, Nepal and Bhutan also, clear? In fact, we had been giving huge financial budget to Bhutan also to develop hydroelectric projects. Clear? The question is why it is important. What is the importance of this help, and is it given in terms of loan or help? Clear? See, India has been a very active player with respect to its neighboring countries. Clear? In fact, just understand it's very important to be understood in international relations. Clear? When India became independent in 1947, along with India only, the whole South Asian region became independent. We had discussed under decolonization. Pakistan became independent along with India. At the same time, later on, Bangladesh was liberated in 1971. Sri Lanka became independent in 1948. Moreover, Nepal and Bhutan. Nepal was never colonized, became independent, and Bhutan remained to be a protectorate state for long. Clear? Thereafter, from 2008, it became completely independent. Clear? All these countries also became independent from British colonialism. Clear? When all these countries became independent in South Asia, the largest country was India, both area-wise as well as population-wise, and more so economically also better off than these countries. Clear? Obviously, when all these countries became independent, it was realized by all the neighboring countries, smaller in nature, that India may flex its arms anytime, and these countries can again be colonized by India, because obviously they had a colonial mindset, because they had become independent for after almost 2 centuries. So this colonial mindset dominated over them, and they never trusted India, because India was the largest country area-wise, population-wise. Clear? And therefore, trust deficit existed between India on the one hand and other countries on the other hand. Even though India wanted to project itself as a big brother and wanted to support these neighboring countries never supported India, never trusted India. That is why by the end of 20th century, exactly in the year 1996, clear, there was Indian Prime Minister Indra Kumar Gujral. Clear? And Indra Kumar Gujral at this time, he gave his own doctrine with respect to neighboring countries known as Gujral's doctrine. Clear? And as per Gujral's doctrine, Indra Kumar Gujral made it clear India will provide unilateral assistance to all these countries without expecting anything in return. Clear? So that these countries should realize India does not have any malafide intention. Rather, India genuinely wants to support this country. Clear? So for this only India started one-sided military, one-sided assistance to all the neighboring countries under Gujral's doctrine. Clear? And thereafter, one-sided assistance began to be provided to Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Maldives. Clear? Just to make it clear that India is a big brother and India genuinely wants the development and India does not have any malafide intention. So most of this assistance is given not as loan but basically as a support to neighboring countries to develop them and to trust India so that whole South Asia can maintain peace and stability. Clear? So just understand some important concept, Vishwajit, here that all the support which is given to Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh is important because India wants to create a larger image among these countries and to eliminate the trust deficit, and it is given as a help, not as a loan. It's clear, Bishwajit. Coming to next question. How far India's recent involvement in initiating peace negotiation, how violates the principle of non-aligned movement? Please discuss, sir. Riju Mishra. Clear? See, as far as Russia-Ukraine conflict is concerned, India who entered into this conflict and India only made it clear from the beginning that no decision should be taken by one or two countries on their own. If sanctions are to be imposed upon Russia and other countries, it should be done with consensus. Clear? India always believed in consensus. India always believes in resolution of any conflict with peaceful resolutions and constructive dialogue. Clear? So India has intervened not on behalf of Russia, not on behalf of Ukraine. India has intervened to ensure that no sanction should be imposed upon Russia unilaterally. Rather, any sanction should be imposed with larger consensus among global community. Clear? If two or three countries can impose sanctions upon Russia, obviously it will affect peace and security. It will not reflect the consensus of global community. So India has not compromised with principle of non-alignment. Clear? India has made it clear that any conflict should be resolved through constructive dialogue and peaceful negotiation, not by imposition of unilateral sanctions on one country or group of countries. This is the stand of India, which does not dilute the principle of non-alignment. Clear? Next is clear. Sir, in case of forceful injection of democracy, it sounds like some kind of dictatorship? Shubham, clear? See, it sounds like dictatorship, obviously. Russia, India, United States being a superpower in the world, United States has always tried to ensure its control. And therefore, in the name of injecting democracy, United States has gone to major countries and that has led to huge devastation. It cannot be denied. Iraq is a big example. Libya is a big example. Clear? All these countries got devastated because of United States intervention and to show that they wanted to inject democracy in the system. Clear? In the name of injecting democracy, they went for forceful regime change and economic devastation. Clear? This has happened and therefore it is said it may not be termed as dictatorship. It sounds like dictatorship, but the United States believes in forceful injection of democracy, which is in contrast to India's approach whereby India believes in peaceful transition towards democratic system. Clear. Next question is, sir, if India gets a permanent seat in Security Council, then is there any chance of getting back POK and Aksai Chin? Nirmai Mondal. Clear. See, it is only a matter to be decided later on. First of all, there are many hurdles for India to get a permanent membership in Security Council. Clear? So first major challenge is to get a membership in Security Council. Yes, after India get membership in Security Council, maybe the issue with Pakistan can be resolved. Why Pakistan can be resolved? Pakistan will not be a member of Security Council and Pakistan can be forced to surrender the region of POK. But it may not be easy with China to take Aksai Chin because China itself is a permanent member of Security Council. That is why China is the biggest opposition of India to get permanent membership in Security Council. So it can be with Pakistan but not with China easily. Clear? Nirmai Mondal. Clear? Next is Bishwajit. What is the India's profit that monitoring support even even large number of Indian people sleep hungry. What is in the India's profit? That monetary support, even when large number of people sleep hungry. Clear? See, you cannot compare directly with situation within India and foreign policy. It cannot be denied. You are right that millions of people are on verge of starvation in India, and then what is the need to provide support to these neighboring countries? Again, I'll let you know. Just understand, Vishwajit, even if these neighboring countries are not supported and millions of people are there suffering hunger and starvation, India cannot be stable. Clear? If neighboring countries are not stable, the country India can also not be stable. Clear? So anything that happens in Pakistan has a direct bearing on India. Anything that happens in Nepal has a direct bearing on India. So if people are left unemployed without any development there, obviously India also cannot remain to be safeguarded. If India becomes a developed nation also, but surrounded by all these countries poor and backward, all these countries will create a blockade for India, and therefore India will not be able to maintain its development cycle. Clear? So if a region has to develop, it is not only that one country has to develop, all adjoining regions also needs to be developed. That is believed in the science of global politics. Clear? So obviously India is concerned not only with itself, but concerned with all its neighboring countries as well. It's clear. Okay, now coming to this doctrine, that is nuclear disarmament. Now do understand, it's very important to be understood. Clear? India adopted the principle of nuclear disarmament, but how come then India became a nuclear weapon state? Nuclear weapon state, we need to understand from the beginning. Clear? And different issues of international politics are involved here. Clear? First of all, when India became an independent nation, at this time, India realized that world is on the verge of devastation due to nuclear and atomic arsenal. Why? Because by the end of Second World War only, clear? By the end of Second World War only, Japan became the victim of nuclear attack, and United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan in 1945. Clear? The devastating effect of nuclear attack, clear, create rippling effect all across the world, and India was very concerned about nuclear weapons at this time. Clear? Therefore, after India's independence in 1947, India decided to draft a peaceful nuclear policy only for energy generation, that is to meet energy requirement. Clear? And India's nuclear policy was drafted by nuclear scientist Homi Jahangir Bhabha. Clear? And it is a three-stage nuclear policy whereby India wants to switch over from uranium to thorium. Clear? In the first stage, pressurized heavy water reactor is used. In the second stage, fast breeder reactor is used, and in the third stage, advanced heavy water reactor is used, so that with limited use of uranium, we can switch over to thorium, because India has limited reserves of uranium, but India has abundant reserves of thorium. In fact, 25% of the global reserve of thorium is found in India. Clear? So obviously, Homi Jahangir Bhabha drafted a three-stage nuclear cycle whereby we could shift from uranium to thorium, and we can use nuclear policy to meet energy requirement. So it was only for peaceful purposes that India started its nuclear policy in 1948 under the leadership of Homi Jahangir Bhabha. Clear? This was a peaceful initiative by India. Clear? But India went on demanding that global community should come forward and nuclear weapons should be restricted. Clear? And at this point, when global community realized that global nuclear weapons needs to be restricted, clear? Global community came forward with an international agreement known as the Partial Test Ban Treaty, or PTBT. This Partial Test Ban Treaty came into existence in 1963, and under the provisions of PTBT, it was decided nuclear tests cannot be conducted by any country in atmosphere, outer space, and in underwater. Clear? So nuclear tests could not be conducted in atmosphere, could not be conducted in outer space, could not be conducted in underwater region. But nuclear tests could be conducted beneath the ground or underneath the ground. Clear? This was not included in the PTBT. Clear? So PTBT was signed and as a first treaty and known as Partial Test Ban Treaty to restrict nuclear proliferation. India signed and ratified this treaty. Signed and ratified means not only leaders of India accepted, but Indian parliamentarians also accepted this, and India became a member of PTBT, signatory of PTBT in 1963. But after some time only, India got disillusioned with global community on nuclear front, because global community came out with a very discriminatory treaty known as the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT, in the year 1968, that came into force on 5th of March 1970. What was basically envisaged in NPT will come to Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Clear? Right, first of all. Clear? Right. Nuclear, right, heading nuclear disarmament, and then right. Clear? Nuclear disarmament. Right, introduction first. Clear? Right. When India became an independent nation, became an independent nation, it expressed its concern. It expressed its concern, expressed its concern over over nuclear weapons, which had devastating effect on Japan, which had devastating impact on Japan, devastating impact on Japan, devastating impact on Japan. Clear? Right? India, India decided to adopt a peaceful nuclear policy, decided to adopt a peaceful nuclear policy, only for energy generation, only for energy generation, energy generation. Clear? Right? India's nuclear scientist, Homi Jahangir Bhabha, India's nuclear scientist, Homi Jahangir Bhabha, drafted a three-stage nuclear policy, drafted a three-stage nuclear policy to gradually shift from use of uranium, to thorium, use of uranium to thorium, Clear? Right. The logic of this policy, the logic of this policy was was that India this policy was that India had only 1% of the global uranium reserves. 1% of the global uranium reserves. 1% of global uranium reserves. But had almost 25%, had almost 25% of the global thorium reserves. 25% of the global thorium reserves. That is why we needed to shift from uranium to thorium. Clear? Reserves. Clear? Reserves. Right. Right. The shift from uranium to thorium. The shift from uranium to thorium was to be done, was to be done, was to be done from pressurized heavy water reactor, was to be done from the pressurized heavy water reactor to the fast breeder reactor, to the fast breeder reactor, and the advanced heavy water reactor, and the advanced heavy water reactor, advanced heavy water reactor. So pressurized heavy water reactor, fast breeder reactor, and advanced heavy water reactor. Reactor. Clear? Reactor. Change paragraph. Clear? Right. At global level, at global level, at global level, international agreement, an international agreement was concluded. An international agreement was concluded in form of the partial test ban treaty, in form of the partial test ban treaty, PTBT, partial test ban treaty, PTBT, in 1963. 1963. Okay. Right. Under the provisions of this treaty, under the provisions of this treaty, nuclear test could not be conducted. Nuclear test could not be conducted. Nuclear test could not be conducted in atmosphere, outer space, and in underwater. They could not be conducted in atmosphere, outer space, and underwater. Okay? Right. However, nuclear test could be conducted. Nuclear test can be conducted beneath the ground or underneath. Nuclear tests could be conducted underneath. Nuclear tests could be conducted beneath the ground or underneath. Beneath the ground or underneath. Beneath the ground or underneath. Or underneath. Do remember this point. That is why India conducted first nuclear test underneath, beneath the ground. Clear? So it was prohibited in atmosphere, outer space, and underwater. Right. India signed and ratified this treaty. India signed and ratified this treaty to check nuclear test, to check nuclear test. Signed and ratified means ratified by parliamentarians. Signed and ratified to check nuclear test. Change paragraph now. Right. India, India was highly disillusioned. However, India was highly disillusioned, highly disillusioned when global community when global community came out, when new global community came out with another treaty, came out with another treaty in 1968, another treaty in 1968 known as the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, known as the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Proliferation means expansion. Non-proliferation means to check expansion. Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT. NPT. Okay, right. This treaty came into force. This treaty came into force in 1970, 1970. Came into force in 1970, whereby it was made clear, whereby it was made clear, it was made clear, it was made clear that five countries were made clear that five countries were nuclear powers. Five countries were nuclear powers known as P5. Five countries were nuclear powers known as P5, known as P5, known as P5 that could conduct nuclear test, that could conduct nuclear test. Nuclear test. Clear? Right. These countries were United States. These countries were United States, Soviet Union, United Kingdom, France, and China. Permanent members of Security Council, same members, and China. They could conduct nuclear test. Right. On the other hand, on the other hand, on the other hand, all other countries, all other countries, all other countries, all other countries cannot conduct nuclear test, cannot conduct nuclear test, or even try to acquire nuclear materials and technology, even try to acquire nuclear materials and technology, nuclear materials and technology from P5, permanent members, P5, from P5, from P5. Clear? Right. In other words, NPT, supported, NPT supported vertical proliferation, NPT supported vertical proliferation and opposed and opposed and opposed horizontal proliferation. Supported vertical proliferation and opposed horizontal proliferation. Now, what is the difference? We'll just understand. Clear? Vertical proliferation means some countries which are already nuclear power state, they can go on stockpiling the nuclear weapons. Clear? By conducting nuclear tests underneath the ground. So this will lead to vertical proliferation. Clear? But horizontal proliferation means If those capable countries could have supplied nuclear materials and technology to other countries, it could have resulted to horizontal proliferation. That is, proliferation at the same level. So some countries were allowed to go for proliferation leading to vertical proliferation. That is, one-sided proliferation. And same countries were prohibited to export nuclear materials and technology to other countries that prohibited horizontal proliferation. This is a difference between vertical and horizontal proliferation. So NPT promoted vertical proliferation, but at the same time prohibited horizontal proliferation. Clear? So obviously it was a discriminatory provision, and just because it proved to be discriminatory in nature, several countries including India refused to sign NPT. Until date, India has not signed NPT. Along with India, countries like Pakistan, Israel, Sudan, and initially North Korea, all of them refused to sign NPT, and all of them claim that NPT is discriminatory in nature because it supports vertical proliferation but at the same time rejects the idea of horizontal proliferation. So first of all, we need to understand this concept, and then only we'll understand why India refuses to sign NPT. Clear? Right. Right. The vertical proliferation means 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 that 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 P5 permanent 5 that P5 could go on could go on could go on stockpiling STOCKPILING permanent 5 could go on stockpiling the nuclear weapons stockpiling the nuclear weapons. Okay, right. At the same time, these countries could not supply nuclear materials and technology. These countries could not supply nuclear materials and technology to nuclear materials technology to other countries to prohibit horizontal proliferation to prohibit horizontal proliferation horizontal proliferation horizontal proliferation. Clear? Right. In this way NPT proved to be discriminatory in nature. In this way NPT proved to be discriminatory in nature and several countries like India Pakistan several countries like India Pakistan Israel Sudan and North Korea refused to sign this treaty. North Korea later on signed, but later on came out also. Clear? Okay. Refused to sign this treaty. Refused to sign this treaty. NPT. Clear? Right only. Right. Till contemporary times, India has not signed NPT. It's a non-NPT nation. India has not signed NPT. Has not signed NPT. Clear till this point? No, just understand from here. Clear? Since India considered NPT to be discriminatory in nature and India got disillusioned by the objective of global community to check nuclear weapons, because anyway global community was, or rather some countries were going for vertical proliferation and some countries were denied access to nuclear materials and technology. Just because of this factor only, India realized that it has to become a nuclear weapon state on its own. Clear? And that is why in 1974, India conducted the first peaceful nuclear test beneath the ground at Pokhran in Rajasthan, which was codenamed as Smiling Buddha, because it was performed on the day of Buddha Purnima and therefore it was declared to be Smiling Buddha. Clear? Even though it was performed beneath the ground, clear, and there were some technical snacks also, clear, global community came to know about this nuclear test of India and global community realized NPT alone cannot be sufficient to check proliferation, and therefore apart from NPT, global community decided to establish a multilateral regime to stop proliferation and to nuclear test, and this multilateral regime established just because of India's test in 1974 was in form of the Nuclear Suppliers Group. We'll come to Nuclear Suppliers Group, which was established because of India only in 1974, that presently comprises of 48 member states as an informal organization. Clear? Now, before this, we'll take the question. Clear? Question is, how Pakistan sold nuclear technology to North Korea? The reason is, Vishwajit, because both Pakistan and North Korea have not signed NPT. Clear? Since they have not signed NPT, obviously they can go for horizontal proliferation. They can supply nuclear materials and technology because both Pakistan and North Korea are not the members of NPT. Right now only we had discussed North Korea, Pakistan, Israel, Sudan and India. So why there was an exception? Nuclear test can be done under the ground in treaty of PTBT. Clear? Obviously because PTBT was realized that some countries had acquired nuclear arsenal. To justify the nuclear arsenal, they need to conduct the test beneath the ground. Why it was allowed beneath the ground? It could have less and less impact on human beings, aquatic life, or any faunal life. Clear? But if it is conducted in atmosphere, outer space, or beneath the ground, it could affect the human beings also, animals also, aquatic life. So it was that it may have less and less impact under the ground. Some countries should be allowed to conduct nuclear tests. Obviously, it was also discriminatory, but since it was the first treaty, India signed and ratified PTBT. Nimai, clear? So this is clear, vertical proliferation and horizontal proliferation. So India got disillusioned, conducted first peaceful nuclear test at Pokhran. Clear? Right. Next paragraph. Out of disillusionment, India, India conducted the first peaceful nuclear test. The first peaceful nuclear test in 1974 at Pokhran, which was codenamed as Smiling Buddha. Codenamed as Smiling Buddha. Pokhran, Rajasthan, infertile region. Pokhran, Smiling Buddha. Which was codenamed Smiling Buddha because it was performed on the day of Buddha Purnima. It was performed on the day of Buddha Purnima. Clear? Buddha Purnima. Clear? Right. After this test, global community global community, global community established a multilateral regime, established a multilateral regime in form of multilateral regime in form of the nuclear suppliers group, multilateralism in form of the nuclear suppliers group, nuclear suppliers group, and even imposed sanctions upon India, and even imposed sanctions upon India, sanctions upon India. Clear? Right here. NSG, Nuclear Suppliers Group, NSG, is an informal grouping. NSG is an informal grouping of 48 countries, member countries, informal grouping of 48 member countries, 48 member countries that divides all the countries, that divides all the countries into two categories, all the countries into two categories of nuclear weapon states, of nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states, and non-nuclear weapon states, non-nuclear weapon states. Okay? Right. It was made clear that nuclear weapon states will not promote, nuclear weapon states will not promote nuclear trade and commerce. Nuclear weapon states will not promote nuclear trade and commerce, nuclear trade and commerce with non-nuclear weapon states, with non-nuclear weapon states, non-nuclear weapon states. Okay, right. India was placed in the category of India was placed in the category of non-nuclear weapon states. India was placed in the category of non-nuclear weapon states that could not procure, that could not procure nuclear materials and technology, nuclear materials and technology. Clear? Right. Moreover, in order to get the membership of NSG, 48 members joined. In order to get membership of NSG, membership of NSG, membership of NSG, NSG, it was mandatory to sign. It was mandatory to sign NPT. It was mandatory to sign NPT, and India could not sign NPT because of discriminatory provision. It was mandatory to sign NPT. That created a problem for India. It was mandatory to sign NPT. So non-NPT members could not become members of NSG. Clear? NSG. This was highly discriminatory in nature. NSG. Clear? India faced huge sanctions because of nuclear suppliers groups, as India could not establish nuclear trade and commerce with nuclear weapon states. That even affected energy program of India. Clear? Right. Such provisions affected India's nuclear program affected India's nuclear program for energy generation. India's nuclear program for energy generation. Clear? Generation. Change paragraph. Like by the end of the 20th century, by the end of the 20th century, end of the 20th century, by the end of the 20th century, global community came out. Global community with comprehensive test ban treaty, came out with comprehensive test ban treaty whereby all forms of nuclear test whereby all forms of nuclear test were to be prohibited. All forms of nuclear test were to be prohibited. So it was to be, it was supposed to come earlier. It came much later after 4 decades. Clear? Were to be prohibited. Clear? Right. However, some countries like United States, some countries like United States had already established nuclear arsenal, had already established nuclear arsenal, and this treaty was this treaty was this treaty was too late. This treaty was too late on the nuclear front. Okay? Right. Therefore, this treaty was also not signed by India. This treaty was also not signed by India. India when it was presented in 1996. When it was presented in 1996. Clear? 1996. Change paragraph. Right. Finally, India moved forward. Finally, India moved forward to conduct. India moved forward to conduct second. India moved forward to conduct the second peaceful nuclear test. Conduct the second peaceful nuclear test in 1998. Second nuclear test in 1998 at Pokhran. In 1998 at Pokhran, which was codenamed as Operation Shakti, which was codenamed as Operation Shakti. Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the Prime Minister. During first nuclear test, Indira Gandhi was Prime Minister, which was codenamed as Operation Shakti. Okay? Right. Thereafter, India formally declared itself to be the nuclear weapon state. 1998. India formally declared itself to be nuclear weapon state. Now, how this status was to be reconciled with principle of nuclear disarmament. Clear? Right. In order to reconcile this status in order to reconcile this status with the principle of nuclear disarmament, with the principle of nuclear disarmament, India came out with another, India came out with another policy of, nuclear doctrine, another policy of nuclear doctrine, another policy of nuclear doctrine. Nuclear policy is different, nuclear doctrine is different. Clear? Nuclear policy is a three-stage policy. That is why we had discussed. Nuclear policy is different from nuclear doctrine. Clear? Now, what is this? Right. And right, according to nuclear doctrine, according to nuclear doctrine, clear? Nuclear doctrine, India, and according to nuclear doctrine, India emphasized on minimum credible, India emphasized on minimum credible deterrence, emphasized on minimum credible deterrence to create deterrent effect on other countries like Pakistan, China. Minimum credible deterrence against other nuclear powers. Minimum credible deterrence against other nuclear powers. So those countries could not intimidate India. India should also make clear that they are nuclear capable. Clear? So just to create deterrent effect on those countries, India adopted nuclear weapon status as mentioned nuclear doctrine. Clear? Right. Beside, India highlighted the principle of no first use. India emphasized on the principle of no first use. India will not take initiative to attack. No first use. But at the same time, but at the same time, emphasized on, but at the same time, emphasized on second strike capability, emphasized on second strike capability, emphasized on second strike capability, second strike capability. Strike capability. That is, if India is attacked, India will have second strike capability. So it was only to create deterrent effect on other countries without having first use policy. It was no first use. Clear? Right. In this way, the status of nuclear weapon state, was reconciled with the principle of nuclear disarmament in India's foreign policy. Nuclear disarmament in India's foreign policy. It's clear everything, starting with PTBT, nuclear policy of India, then PTBT, then at the nuclear test, then you have to understand about nuclear non-proliferation treaty, NSG, then nuclear test of India, first in 1974, then in 1998, and then finally nuclear doctrine. Clear? Very important topic for your international relations. Clear? Now, the question is from Parth. So, what is meaning of informal grouping? Informal grouping means any grouping that does not have any permanent secretariat or any large set of bureaucracy. Clear? So those organizations which does not have any permanent secretariat and large bureaucratic setup are known as informal grouping. And formal organizations are having the permanent setup, like United Nations has permanent setup at New York. Clear? Then International Labour Organization permanent setup at Geneva. So all permanent formal organizations will have the permanent secretariat, and at the same time there would be a system routine meeting of all the members. Clear? Informal groups are not guided by any routine setup meeting. At the same time, they can call the meeting at any time required depending on situation. And informal grouping does not have any permanent setup or rather secretariat or rather bureaucratic setup. There's a difference between formal and informal grouping. Clear? Now, apart from this, we had discussed about objectives of foreign policy indicating realism, principles indicating idealism, and that is why India's foreign policy is considered to be blend of realism and idealism. With this background, now we'll move on to discuss about India's relationship with major powers of the world, and in the major powers of the world we'll discuss India's relationship with major countries like United States, Russia, then France, then Israel, other countries. Clear? So obviously, first of all, we'll discuss India's interaction with the most powerful country in the world, that is United States. We'll discuss Indo-US bilateral relationship, and it is a big topic. It involves huge amount of dimensions. We'll discuss about all these dimensions related to Indo-US bilateral relationship. So we'll start first of all with India's bilateral relationship with United States. Clear? What would be the approach? First of all, we'll discuss the approach, and after discussing approach, then we'll discuss about the components of Indo-US relationship, including all contemporary dynamics till present times. It's clear? We'll start with Indo-US relationship tomorrow. Clear? Time is almost over. In fact, it is over. So we'll start with Indo-US relationship tomorrow, and we'll discuss about this relationship in all its dimensions. Clear? Thank you and all the best. There's a question, just wait. India is much larger than Pakistan in size, but it is claimed that India has less amount of nuclear weapons than Pakistan. Why? See, it's not about size. Nuclear weapons can be acquired by nuclear scientists and by nuclear trade and commerce. So even a small country, North Korea is a very small country having large number of nuclear arsenal. So nuclear weapons does not depend on size. Nuclear weapons depend on nuclear trade and commerce with other countries. So Pakistan is keen to acquire more and more nuclear weapons. North Korea is keen to acquire more and more nuclear weapons, and therefore they have more nuclear weapons than even India. India being a welfare state, progressive state, India only wants nuclear weapons for deterrence effect, not for any intimidation. So India does not emphasize on this. Clear? That is why nuclear weapons does not depend on size. It is more in Pakistan than in India, no doubt. Clear? Why there's a huge gap between first nuclear test and second nuclear test? The reason is first nuclear test was conducted because of disillusion with NPT. Second nuclear test was conducted to show India as a power. Atal Bihari Vajpayee wanted to make it clear that since global community has failed to stop proliferation, it is better to become a nuclear weapon state as a major country to be reckoned with. So to get reckoned with as a major nuclear power, obviously India needed to conduct nuclear tests after the disillusionment with Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty in 1996. So second nuclear test was conducted in 1998. It's clear? So we'll continue from here tomorrow, and we'll start with Indo-US relationship. Thank you.